In this video, I'm going to show you how to take the base color and normal map information from your high poly model out of reality capture and get it onto your low poly model. First, I'm going to import in that low poly into Substance Painter. I'm going to go to File, New, and we're going to find our low poly. I did use a different program to unwrap it. The last video I showed with this was making a low poly in ZBrush, but I did go ahead and import this into another program to do the final unwrap on it. And I did do a little bit of mesh cleanup in there, and you'll see that in a second. So make sure you do that step before you do this step, because it does need a UV unwrap on it or this won't work. Whichever template you want to use, that's going to depend on where you're going to end up. You know, are you taking it into Unreal? Are you taking it into Unity? Are you uploading it to Sketchfab? If you don't know which one, you could always just do the PBR metallic roughness alpha blend or alpha test. Doesn't matter for us because we're not doing anything with alpha. Document resolution, I do like to bump this up as high as I can so that when I do my bakes, if I do need to take it down, I can always take it down later, but I don't want to have to go back in and rebake it. Your normal map format, again, depends on where it's going to end up. If you're going to do Unity, you want to switch to OpenGL. If you're doing Unreal, you want to keep it in DirectX. If you're just doing it for Sketchfab, might as well keep it on DirectX. By default, Sketchfab uses DirectX, but you could switch it to OpenGL if you wanted to. The other important thing is to make sure you unclick Auto Unwrap. Sometimes the first time you open the program, this will be checked on, but you do want to make sure you uncheck that because you probably spent some time making a beautiful unwrap and you don't want it to mess up. So I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to switch to the 3D 2D view so you can see, get this pulled over, both at the same time. Like I said, I did spend a little bit of time to fix my stump on here. I wanted to make sure that that was getting some 3Dness on it because I lost it a little bit too much in ZBrush, but it was a lot faster for me to drop down the polygons in ZBrush and then just remodel that afterwards. If you want to see that wireframe I ended up with, let's go under display settings and turn that on for a moment. And we can see we have a pretty good mesh. With the unwrap, some things to keep in mind when doing that is we do want to keep our textile density consistent through our entire thing so that the material will look consistent through the whole surface. We also want to take up as much space as possible while minimizing the amount of stretching and number of islands. So we don't want to just shatter this into a bunch of million pieces. There's a lot of reasons why, but I'm not going to go into it in this video, but we also don't want it to stretch too much. So, you know, this is a pretty good coverage. We're taking up as much of the space as possible without cutting it too much. But we are ready to do our bake. So first thing, let me switch it back over to the 2D, 3D only. I just prefer this view myself. I'm going to go underneath texture set settings and I'm going to come down to bake mesh maps. Now we don't need to bake all of the mesh maps, and depending on, you know, what you're doing, it could take a while to bake them all out. But let's just start with the common settings. I'm going to change my output size to at least 4K. I might consider dropping it down to up to 8K, but this is probably fine for us. I do want to add that high definition mesh of the high poly. So that's this one. So this view and what we see here is extremely important. We need to make sure that the high poly and the low poly are existing in the same exact space. Depending on what you did with the stump, if you are following along with this, it's possible you might have some red marks on it, which means that the default max frontal and max rear distance might not be enough. And you could tweak this a little bit to, you know, push it out. But if you're finding you have major problems or for some reason it doesn't look like this, most likely the culprit is that the pivot points for the high poly are not in the same spot as the low poly, or they have a weird scale on them. Like the high poly might accidentally not might be scaled at 100 when the low poly is at 1, or it's, off somewhere. So if it doesn't look clean like this, your first step is to go back to whatever program you use to unwrap it. I would make sure you import that high poly into it and make sure that they are sharing the same, pivot points in the same spot. They're in the same transform. And if not, fix it before you come back to here, re-export it out, and then come back to this step. Okay, so if it should look something like this. You might need to tweak these, and that's fine. And then we're going to come over here and turn off most of these. So we are going to keep our normal map. We do not need world space normal. We do need our ID map, but we have to make a change to this, and this is an extremely important change. We're going to change the color source from material color to vertex color. And this is how we're going to be able to bake our base color from that high poly, which is being stored in the vertices, if you remember, onto our low poly unwrap. That's kind of like the secret, is this right here, the ID map, vertex color. If you go through this and it doesn't work, most likely this is the issue, is you forgot to switch it to vertex color, or you're having an issue with the high poly, low poly sharing the pivot point and transform. I do like to keep my ambient occlusion, so I'm going to keep that on, but I'm going to turn off curvature, position, and thickness. I do not need those maps. Once I have this all set, I'm going to click Bake Selected Textures. And we can see them kind of pop on real quick. We should see that color map pop on, and then we are done. Oops, I accidentally kept position on. That's okay though. It's not going to hurt anything. So once that's done, I'm going to return to paint mode, and then we're going to set this up a little bit nicer. I've gotten into the habit of liking to set up these mesh maps myself. The biggest reason is sometimes with photogrammetry, you have to clean up a normal map. And if you leave it underneath the texture set settings, it makes it hard to fix. So usually the first thing I do is underneath texture set settings is I take all of these off. The ID map, the ambient occlusion map, and anything else I ran so that this is empty. I'm then going to rebuild that underneath my layers. So first things first, I don't need a paint layer. I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to just add a fill layer. I need to find all of those maps I just baked so I can apply them now to the properties of the fill layer. The easiest way to do this is going to be to come over here, wherever this is in yours. Maybe it's here, maybe it's down here, depends on your layout. And I am going to switch it from all libraries to project. And then I'm going to click on the texture right here. And this will just show me all of the textures associated with the project, which should be just stuff that I baked. So what I'm going to do now is just grab this color map, click and drag it into base color. I'm then going to grab my normal map, click and drag it and drop it into normal. I don't need a height map, so I'm going to turn that off. I don't need a metal, I don't need an opacity, and I don't need an emissive map. Usually for roughness, I do push it up all the way to nothing for this first go. So we have our mango. I do tend to do another layer to put on my ambient occlusion. So I'm going to add another fill layer. So I'm just going to click the fill layer. I only need base color for this. So I'm going to turn off everything but base color, and I'm going to drop in that ambient occlusion. The way this works is very similar to Photoshop with the layers. So I'm not going to keep it on a normal blend. I'm going to switch this over to a multiply. And it just kind of gives it that little bit of pop. It's not as easy to see on the mango since there isn't as much finer detail on it. But if you do want to put an ambient occlusion map back on your item, you can do that. If you're just finding you need it a little bit stronger, you can then always duplicate that to make it, you know, push your ambient occlusion. The last thing we do need to make is a roughness map. And I, in my opinion, feel that a roughness map is one of the more important maps. I would rather have a really robust roughness map over a normal map because it can really help tell you what the surface detail is. If you're kind of in a hurry and you just need to get something out quick, usually what I'll do is I'll make a fill layer of our roughness. So I'll turn off everything but roughness. And, you know, I'll drop it down so that we get it, you know, this is just temporary. We're not going to leave it this shiny. It shouldn't be that shiny. And what I'll do though is I'll add a white mask. You can add a black mask too. It honestly doesn't matter. But on that mask, I'm going to then add a fill layer because this will then allow me to use my ambient occlusion. So I'm going to just click and drag that into the grayscale, kind of as a mask for that roughness. Because in general, and you know, obviously there's situations where this isn't true, where it is going to get that ambient occlusion, where it's going to be dark, is where it's going to be rougher, because you're thinking of like all your nooks and crannies. That's where the dust is going to settle and make it look rougher, versus our surface area, which wouldn't get that ambient occlusion and would be white. So if we go and actually look at what that roughness looks like, we get something like this. So it's rougher around here and a little bit here, and it's shinier here. You know, obviously it's still a bit much, but what we can then do is go back to that roughness layer and start to tweak this, because, you know, this would be full rough, which isn't what we want, but we can start to push it till we get just, you know, a little bit of roughness, but it's not, you know, as rough around some of our edges. I do always like to switch kind of back to here and see. If we're finding that it's not enough, we could always, on this, we could always add a levels to that, and we can tweak, you know, tweak that fill layer so that it would be a little bit more contrasty if we do need that. Like this is another way we could kind of do that. And I, you know, I kind of really do want to push it some so that we have a little more contrast in that roughness. And now we're starting to get something that does feel a little bit more realistic. Like roughness shouldn't just be a solid color. Nothing in real life has that kind of roughness unless maybe you just cleaned it and it's fresh from the factory and it's just like a perfect amount. So spending just a little bit of time to get an organic roughness is worth it. The last thing I do want to show is what if you end up with a noisy normal map? And this is pretty common with photogrammetry, where you might end up with an area where it gets a little bit crunchy or a little bit kind of muddled when it really shouldn't be. How do you fix that? Like real quick, how do you fix that? I'm going to show that to you. This is one of the reasons why I do take it off my texture set. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to make a new fill layer, but I'm going to take everything off. Actually, we don't need to do fill layer. We'll do it with a paint layer. You can either do this as a paint layer, like a regular layer, or a fill layer, but if you do it as a fill layer, you'll be doing it on the mask instead. For simplicity's sake, let's just do it as a paint layer, but we're just going to turn off everything but our normal map. What we need to do first though is we do need to switch this from base color over to normal, because we don't want to blend it down like this normal, basically like a normal multiply or pass through, combine, whatever this is. We just want to make it normal so that anything we paint on the surface will be at this. So if I then go ahead and start painting the normal map color, like this default normal map color, we can see that we can kind of rub out any kind of imperfections. So, you know, if we do just want to paint it because we're just in a hurry, we just need to get it just 100% off, we can do it as a paint layer. So if I switch it back to the material, you can kind of see it disappearing on the surface. It's very subtle, but you know, we're doing this because it has like, you know, subtle issues. It works really well. If it ends up being a bit too much, again, you might want to play with doing a fill layer with a normal matte color and then you paint on the mask. But we could always, you know, change the opacity of that layer to just take it out a little bit. You'll want to always do this technique with painting with this default normal map color, because what it's doing is it's making it flat. So if you have like these higher peaks here, we can paint it out and it kind of blends it and like kind of softens it. But I'm, you know, pretty satisfied with what I have, so I'm not actually going to do that. You know, I think I'm pretty much done with my mango. When we are ready to export, just do a File, Export Textures, and make sure that you choose what output template you want based on where you're importing it in. PBR metallic that it was on is metallic roughness is fine if you're just doing it to Sketchfab, but if you are doing it to Unity, make sure you are doing it to the Universal Render Pipeline Metallic Standard. Unreal Engine is just the packed one, so it'll pack it nicely for you, or anything else. You can upload it directly to Sketchfab, but you will need to know what your login information is and log into it. We got that. I'm going to make sure that this exports out to my Mango folder. I do want to make sure that I tell it what size I want it to be, because I actually probably don't want it at a 4K. I could probably get away with a 2K now that everything is said and done, and then just do an export. It'll spit out all the maps for me into my folder, and then I am good to go. Hopefully you have found this useful and you begin to start importing in your photogrammetry models to either a game engine or just uploading it to Sketchfab for people to see.